Hello, and welcome to the History Channel. I'm Arthur Kent. In 1991, I reported from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait as the United States led Allied forces into war in the Persian Gulf. Today, I'm surrounded by soldiers of the 3rd Infantry Division training here at Fort Stewart in Georgia. Nearly 6,000 men and women from this division fought in Operation Desert Storm. Their goal, to end the Iraqi occupation of Kuwait. Today, more than 15,000 of them are currently stationed in Kuwait, with many thousands more to follow. The History Channel takes an in-depth look at Operation Desert Storm and the technology, the air power, and the overwhelming ground force that routed the Iraqi military. Join us now for the first of 3 programs on Operation Desert Storm, the Air Campaign.
3, 2, 1, 1.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait.
We'll run position lights dim. Altitude will be from 50 to 100 feet at 100 knots.
In the early hours of January 17, 1991, 8 Apache helicopters slipped unnoticed across the Saudi border into western Iraq. Their mission, knock out 2 critical radar sites. The Apaches were the Army's primary attack helicopter in the Gulf, able to fly at night thanks to forward-looking infrared, or FLIR technology. Through this rotating pod, the Apache's FLIR sensors could detect infrared emissions that showed up on the pilot's screen as thermal imagery, an enhanced negative image of the landscape. By 2:38 a.m., the Apaches had easily found their targets.
Okay, range target, 2,900 feet is what I'm shooting at.
Covered with armor made of boron carbide and Kevlar, the Apache's weaponry included a 30mm cannon and Hellfire missiles, each 5 foot 10 inches long and able to hit a target 4 miles away.
There you go, all right. You wanted it, baby? You got it.
Shortly before 3 a.m., the Apaches obliterated the Iraqi radar sites, and the Gulf War had begun.
I see people running around now.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak.
From the beginning, Allied air power proved to be the dominant force in the Gulf War. The aircraft and weaponry used in Operation Desert Storm represented a new kind of warfare. In the 15 years since the Vietnam War, America had developed technology that changed the way the U.S. did battle.
The major difference was precision-guided weapons, which essentially in the Gulf War meant laser-guided bombs and cruise missiles. I think people were totally unprepared for both the fact that the technology largely worked, but also that this was going to be the key part of the strategy.
The events leading up to the Gulf War had begun 6 months earlier, when Iraq's President Saddam Hussein invaded, then annexed Kuwait in August 1990. With that, Iraq controlled 20% of the world's oil, something the United States found unacceptable.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand?
After Iraq ignored a UN deadline of January 15th to withdraw from Kuwait, an American-led Allied coalition launched a massive airstrike against Iraq 2 days later, on January 17th, 1991.
First night was an amazing orchestration of systems, men, women, and personnel into a command and control event that the likes of warfare had never seen before.
Allied planes began an all-out bombardment of the vital command, control, and communication centers Iraq needed to defend itself.
The targets being struck tonight are located throughout Iraq and Kuwait. Our focus is on the destruction of Saddam Hussein's offensive military capabilities.
If there was any one single objective, it was to paralyze, isolate, and control Saddam Hussein's ability to respond militarily to coalition operations.
Leading the way was the virtually undetectable F-117 stealth fighter. At about 0300, 8 of the aircraft arrived over Baghdad as Iraqi gunners filled the sky with anti-aircraft fire.
The scenes that you see in Baghdad of the thousands of rounds being fired, it represents frustration. They know something's up there, they know the bombs are coming down, they can't see them, so they shoot.
The stealth's ability to fly over Baghdad undetected was a quantum leap in aerial warfare.
The secret to stealth was basically using a variety of discrete technologies to offset the ability of an enemy to use radar against you. We use shaping technologies that minimize the ability of the radar to see you. We used radar-absorbent structure composed of radar-absorbent materials, and then we used coatings and edge treatments.
The F-117's near invisibility had another advantage. The stealth bomber could carry out missions alone.
Before stealth, the aircraft that were carrying the kill missiles had to be protected by other aircraft which were designed to suppress the enemy air defenses that might come up. So there was a whole panoply of airplanes that had to go out to support 1 or 2 airplanes that are going to actually make the attack.
With the F-117, it was all one package. It would sneak in on its own, it would deliver its munitions on a couple targets, and it would sneak back out on its own.
The weaponry used by the stealth jets over Iraq was also state-of-the-art. By pointing a laser beam at a specific target, the pilot of the F-117 was able to guide his 2,000-pound bomb with pinpoint precision towards the target.
So it was no longer the case that you were dropping lots of bombs with the hope that some of those bombs would land on a military target in an urban area or in the middle of the desert. It was now the case that individual bombs were being put against individual targets.
Over Baghdad, F-117s targeted Iraq's vital military, political, and communication centers.
We took the war straight to the center of Baghdad, straight to where the power structure was from minute 1 of the war.
In other parts of Iraq and in Kuwait, F-117s aimed at airfields, railroad yards, bridges, and Scud missile storage facilities. In a matter of minutes, the F-117s had finished their missions as they landed safely back in Saudi Arabia. Tomahawk cruise missiles were already airborne, bound for Baghdad. The Tomahawk missile used during Desert Storm was a long-range, unmanned land attack weapon launched from both surface ships and submarines. With its terrain-reading software, the Tomahawk boasted a high degree of accuracy and was the Navy's first choice against heavily defended targets. At 3:06 a.m., the first of 54 missiles hit the capital.
I can report to you that the airstrikes have started. The Tomahawks have already started to impact in the Baghdad area.
The 3,000-pound Tomahawks found their way thanks to a terrain contour matching guidance system, otherwise known as TERCOM. TERCOM registers 3-dimensional imagery of the ground below and matches what it sees to 3D maps of the same terrain stored in the missile's memory. This mapping system allowed the Tomahawk to fly low to the ground, under 100 feet, before hitting its target. With its low-altitude flight capability and its 20-inch diameter, the Tomahawk was difficult for Iraqi radar to detect. However, the Tomahawk also faced challenges.
The Tomahawks use a ground mapping system to track where they're going. Unfortunately, in the deserts of Iraq, there weren't a lot of ground features that would help enable it.
Between the Persian Gulf, where the Tomahawks were launched, and Baghdad lay hundreds of miles of barren desert. The Tomahawk, which needed specific terrain characteristics to guide it, had little to go by in Iraq. So Tomahawk programmers suggested using the Zagros Mountains of western Iran, just north of the Persian Gulf, for the terrain features to guide the missiles.
So somebody got the brainy idea, well, why don't we go on up the mountains in western Iran, and then when we reach a turning point, have them turn west and then fly into Iraq.
Instead of flying northwest in a straight line towards Baghdad, the missiles would fly directly north following the spine of the Zagros. Then the Tomahawks would veer west towards Baghdad. Many of the missiles, in fact, had already been programmed during the Cold War to fly over the Iranian mountains straight into Russia.
And everybody raised their eyebrows about doing something like that because we're violating Iranian airspace. Plus the fact that the missiles initially looked like it was still going to the Soviet Union.
But the U.S. didn't have a better solution. So with a slight modification of the Cold War programming, the Tomahawks flew through Iranian airspace en route to Baghdad.
We did not notify Iran. I would seriously doubt that they had any knowledge whatsoever that the Tomahawks were coming into their airspace, number one. And number two, I can almost guarantee you they didn't know they were there when they actually traversed the airspace either.
Many of the Tomahawk strikes in Baghdad were designed to disrupt Iraq's energy production capability. The targets? 28 electrical power plants that supplied much of Iraq with electricity. Tomahawk strikes would continue through the night, as did subsequent waves of stealth attacks. By dawn of the 17th, Iraq's ability to generate power was severely disrupted, and Baghdad's vital command, communication, and control centers were inoperable. The Allies had achieved their first objective. When we return, the battle for the skies begins. By the second and third days of Operation Desert Storm, many of the Allied missions turned to achieving air superiority, a critical phase of the air campaign.
Well, what was going to prevent us from dominating the skies? It would be the Iraqi Air Force and the Iraqi air defenses.
To achieve air superiority, the Allies had to do three things: neutralize Iraq's air defense network, destroy its air force, and suppress both its SAMs, surface-to-air missiles, and AAA, anti-aircraft artillery.
Saddam Hussein had put together a first-rate command and control system and an air defense system that was very redundant and very complex and difficult to take apart.
The Iraqi air defense system had a very, very good radar system. They were interconnected. They could work independently. They could work together. If one was down, others could substitute for them.
Pre-war intelligence had revealed no less than 5 major sector operation centers, or SOCs, 1 in Baghdad, 3 throughout Iraq, and 1 in Kuwait. Each of these SOCs was linked to several interceptor operation centers, or IOCs. Each IOC, in turn, had communication links with numerous early warning radar posts.
So when you tied it all together, that was the control system that the Iraqis used to defend the country, as well as their forces deployed in Kuwait.
Strikes against Iraq's air defense system began as early as January 17th, the first night of the war. Assigned the task of destroying Iraq's early warning radar was the F-4G Wild Weasel, a Vietnam-era twin-engined aircraft that could pick up electronic radar emissions from unsuspecting Iraqi defense positions. Using those emissions as a target, the Weasel would fire high-speed anti-radiation missiles, or HARMs, at the radar. The HARM missile, nearly 14 feet long and weighing 800 pounds, could hit a radar up to 80 miles away at a speed of over 700 miles an hour.
It had the effect of not only destroying a number of Iraqi units, but forcing Iraqi air defenses not even to turn their radars on, for fear of being hit by these missiles.
During their initial wave of attacks, stealth F-117s used precision guidance systems to bomb the major operation centers of Saddam's air defense network. Behind the stealths flew Tomahawk missiles, which targeted the electrical plants in and around Baghdad, shutting off the juice to the SOC's computers and disrupting the communication of vital information between Iraqi outposts in the field and the 5 centers of command.
I think the keystone event there was when we started to take down the Iraqi integrated air defense system. That was absolutely key. And the success of the whole campaign really depended on how well we would achieve that one event.
By dawn on the morning of the 17th, the Iraqi integrated air defense network had been totally disrupted. With its central command and control neutralized, much of the Iraqi Air Force spent the first 24 hours on the ground.
They were outnumbered, they were outgunned. There was no way that they were going to be able to compete with us unless you were going up on a suicide mission. There wasn't any point in taking off.
Throughout the next days of the war, those Iraqi pilots who did brave the skies encountered combat air patrols, or CAPs, of American fighter jets like the Navy's F-14. Featured in the movie Top Gun, the F-14 Tomcat was a supersonic, twin-engine plane built to engage and destroy enemy aircraft. It had variable wing positioning, which could shift from a fanned-out position 64 feet wide to a swept-back position only 38 feet wide, giving the plane remarkable agility.
In a dogfight, if you're going to engage another aircraft, you want to be able to fly both fast and slow and be able to turn a real tight circle in order to, one, either maneuver yourself into a position to shoot at the other airplane or to defeat a weapon that's being shot at you.
With an advanced radar called the AWG-9, the Tomcat could track 24 separate targets at the same time and fire up to 6 missiles at 6 separate targets simultaneously.
Had the Iraqis taken off and attempted to fight the Tomcats, they'd probably have been destroyed well before they got into the Tomcats area.
Another U.S. fighter patrolling the Iraqi skies was the Air Force F-15 Eagle, called the best air superiority fighter in the world.
He's a king.
Excellent. With its high engine thrust and its relatively short wingspan, 42 feet, the F-15 could turn sharply at high speeds while pursuing enemy aircraft. By the end of the first week of Desert Storm, it was clear that Iraqi planes were no match for the American F-14s and F-15s.
When the Iraqi Air Force came up to engage our aircraft, they were losing. The average time from the takeoff of an Iraqi fighter to the time it was shot down was 4.5 minutes.
3, red. Splash! Splash coming out westbound!
The Iraqi early warning system has completely failed, and their aircraft have been caught totally by surprise when we attacked them.
Flying command and control for Allied aircraft was the E-3 Sentry, or AWACS, for Airborne Warning and Control System. The E-3 was a Boeing 707 crammed with electronics and radar, topped off by a 30-foot rotating radome.
There's an F-18 coming in. As you can see, this gets really pretty. It also gets quite confusing because you've got an awful lot of airplanes floating around the area.
And it has sophisticated radar and communications inside, and they could monitor every aircraft in the air. And when you think about it, sometimes there were 300 or 400 airplanes in the air and more.
Because so few Iraqi jets chose to fight, U.S. air commanders went after them on the ground. On January 23rd, the 7th day of Operation Desert Storm, they concentrated their attacks on heavily fortified Iraqi aircraft bunkers, runways, and airfields. British Tornadoes, the main attack aircraft of the Royal Air Force, were assigned the difficult task of braving surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery to bomb Iraqi airfields.
And they used tactics that had been developed to use against the Soviets in a war in Europe, which were low-level tactics, where they came in very fast, very low, and dropped their bombs. The Iraqis were putting up a curtain of fire, they would run into it and lose it.
Within the first week, Iraqi ground fire downed 4 Tornadoes, accounting for 25% of Allied aircraft losses throughout the war. Helping the Tornadoes were massive B-52 bomber raids, which carpeted Iraqi airfields with tons of conventional bombs. The 160-foot-long aircraft could carry up to 70,000 pounds of bombs, mines, and air-launched missiles at one time. It proved particularly effective in disabling Iraqi airfields and helping the Allies achieve air superiority. The attacks on the Iraqi bases forced many of their pilots into the sky to escape the bombardment. Navy Captain Mark Clementi quickly discovered they didn't intend to fight.
And I had probably 15 aircraft on my radar scope. We had the missiles all tuned up, and I was absolutely certain that I was going to have to shoot someone there within the next 30 to 60 seconds. As we got closer to the target, all the Iraqi aircraft started heading north, running away from their airfield, which I guess in retrospect makes sense because there was a lot of bombs going off at the field they took off from, and it wasn't a pretty picture below.
Most of the Iraqi planes headed for Iran. On January 25th, the 10th day of Operation Desert Storm, and a mere 3 days after bunker busting began, more than 20 of Iraq's best fighters fled to the relative safety of Iranian airstrips. By the war's end, that total would reach 140.
Saddam Hussein knew that the war was going to last forever, and there was no sense in losing these airplanes if he didn't have to, because they weren't going to do him any good anyway.
Airstrikes against the Iraqi air defense system would continue through the end of the war. But U.S. air commanders felt confident enough by the end of the air campaign's second week to declare Allied air superiority over Iraq. When we return, Saddam strikes back with Scuds. Saddam Hussein responded to the initial bombing attacks of Operation Desert Storm by firing crude ballistic missiles called Scuds at Israel and Saudi Arabia on the second day of the war. Designed by the Soviet Union in the 1960s, the Scud had a limited range and no electronic guidance system to steer it. It was considered more an instrument of terror than an effective military weapon.
It was the one weapon he possessed that could possibly crack the coalition. How was Saddam hoping to crack the coalition? By firing as many missiles as he could against Israel to try to get the Israelis to enter the war.
Saddam reasoned that if Israel joined the Allies, the other Arab nations would abandon the coalition rather than fight alongside Israel. So from the outset of Desert Storm, eradicating the Scud threat became a major Allied military objective and one of the most difficult challenges facing the air strategists in Riyadh. Adding to that pressure was the chance that Saddam would load his Scud with chemical agents.
There was great anxiety that Scuds would arrive carrying chemical weapons. Saddam had used chemical weapons against rebels in his own country. He'd basically destroyed a village in the 1980s with a chemical attack. There was no doubt in anyone's mind in Tel Aviv or in Washington or anywhere else that Saddam had this in his bag of tricks.
As the first Scuds crashed down in Tel Aviv on January 18th, it quickly became clear that Saddam wasn't using chemical warheads, probably out of fear of nuclear retaliation from Israel or the United States. Nevertheless, the Scuds did cause deaths and injuries as well as millions of dollars in damage. Within a day of the initial missile attacks, Army strategists believed they'd found the answer to the Scud problem. They aimed the Patriot anti-aircraft missile at an incoming Scud over Saudi Arabia. Although designed as an anti-aircraft weapon, the Patriot reportedly destroyed the Scud before it hit the ground. With additional software and a modification of its warhead, the Army Patriot PAC-2 became an overnight media sensation as a Scud buster.
And the Patriot success, of course, is known to everyone. It's 100% so far of 33 engaged. There have been 33 destroyed.
The assertion right from the get-go when the Patriots were first launched was that they were basically flawless.
In reality, the Patriots were far from flawless. Israeli monitors were soon estimating that only 2 out of every 10 Patriots successfully hit Scuds.
Part of the problem was that the Scuds were so poorly made that they were breaking up in flight. They would come apart into 3, 4, 5 more pieces. For the Patriot missile trying to understand what was happening at Mach 6 or Mach 7, many miles above the Earth, trying to discern the pieces of Scud that were falling toward it from the actual warhead. it was a very confusing thing.
As Patriots chased pieces of incoming Scud, U.S. air commanders came under intense pressure from the White House to find and destroy the mobile launchers that were firing Scuds. Coalition Commander Norman Schwarzkopf bristled at Washington's intervention, believing the Scud to be a militarily insignificant weapon.
I, frankly, would be more afraid of standing out in a lightning storm in southern Georgia than I would be standing out in the streets of Riyadh when the Scuds are coming down. If it's going to hit you, it's going to hit you, but the percentages are so much less.
Nevertheless, Schwarzkopf allocated 20% of Allied air power just to hunt for Scuds in order to keep Israel out of the war. One of the primary aircraft used to find Scud launches was the J-Stars, an experimental reconnaissance aircraft that could track enemy troop and artillery movement on the ground.
J-Stars, for the first time, it gave us a look at what was happening on the ground, and we could track tanks, individual tanks, trucks, and everything else.
But even with such sophisticated technology, finding the primitive Scud launchers proved one of the most challenging tactical operations of the entire war.
Scud shooters in Iraq became very adept at shoot and scurry away. It would take them about 20 minutes to set up the launchers, to light the fuse, to watch the missile take off, and to disappear into the night.
The difficulty of identifying Scud launchers became clear on January 30th, when Air Commander Buster Glosson showed video of what he identified as mobile Scud launchers being destroyed.
I'll put you in the cockpit of an F-15E for an air-to-ground sortie. There are a total of 11 vehicles loaded with Scud missiles. As you can see, these have already been fired.
But it turned out the targets were not Scud launchers at all.
At the CIA and among other places, they were watching this press conference and watching this videotape, which they had not seen before. And there was a quick realization that these were not mobile Scud launchers. The general consensus was quickly arrived at that they were, in fact, oil trucks.
If he was wrong, he was wrong. He wasn't trying to mislead anybody. He believed that they were Scud launches. But at the end of the day, it didn't matter because we couldn't stop the mobile Scuds.
The lack of intelligence about the location of mobile Scuds underscored the challenge of the mission.
It's a very large area to be able to search, and frankly, without the queuing, the intelligence queuing and knowledge of where these mobile systems are located, it was difficult to get to the launchers before they could shoot and scoot and go hide somewhere else.
It was not a campaign that worked extremely well. What we can say worked is that we cut the number of Scud launches from an average of 10 a day to an average of 1 a day.
The failure to eliminate Scuds led to one of the worst disasters of the war. On February 25th, a Scud missile slammed into a barracks full of American soldiers in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia, exploding in a huge fireball and killing 28.
There's 53 for sure. That was my unit. They're gone.
One of these ambulances has to go up there. All the people are up here.
The Patriot missile system that was supposed to stop the Scud wasn't operating at the time, allowing the Scud to fly in unchallenged. Later, the Pentagon admitted the system was down due to a glitch in its computer program, a glitch that could have been avoided. According to Israeli experts, the software that ran the Patriot's internal clock needed to be rebooted every few hours, or the Patriot's aim would be ruined. At Dhahran, that software had reportedly not been rebooted in 4 days.
The Patriot, by this time, had accumulated enough of an error in its computer brain to be looking at an area of sky that was actually 700 yards away from where it should have been looking. It's looking, it's looking, it's looking, it sees nothing, it sees clear skies, it doesn't fire.
Despite the disaster in Dhahran, the Pentagon estimated that the Patriot missile defense system saved thousands of lives.
We have to say the Patriot achieved 2 important goals. One is it sort of proved on some level that missile defenses were possible. And a weapon system which had never particularly been designed or built to shoot down a ballistic missile seemed to have the ability to get close. But really the more important thing that the Patriot missile achieved was it achieved convincing the Israelis that they didn't need to retaliate.
Hunting Scuds, though, was not a top priority of the air campaign. eradicating Saddam's chemical, biological, and nuclear threat was. From the very beginning of Operation Desert Storm, some of the most important targets were Iraq's suspected nuclear, biological, and chemical facilities.
Those are high-priority elements that we did not want used against coalition forces. So it wasn't just targeting them solely to destroy, but also to deny the adversary access to those weapons of mass destruction.
Yet from the outset, U.S. commanders acknowledged they had limited information about the full scope of Iraq's nuclear, biological, and chemical programs.
The extent to which Saddam had really developed a weapons system was not clear, but you had to err on the side of caution.
So during the first 24 hours of Desert Storm alone, the Allies flew 535 sorties targeting suspected NBC sites.
What we knew about, we targeted. What we targeted, we destroyed.
Bombing a suspected biological or chemical weapons facility was a tricky assignment for coalition airmen, given the lethal contents inside.
The other problem with destroying chemical and biological weapons or spores or storage areas is the impact that that potentially can have on the populace at large and even your own ground troops when they are engaged later on.
So stealth fighters were chosen to penetrate suspected NBC targets.
The attack plan called for a sequence of bombing in which the F-117 stealths, which had the most precision-capable ability to put a bomb right on a target, would come in and they would crack open these concrete eggs.
The laser-guided bombs would puncture the storage areas and hopefully blow up the agents or the munitions inside.
And they would be followed by F-111s, which came in with cluster bombs, which turned this shattered rubble into a pyre with the tremendous heat that would then consume a good part of the biological agents, and sunlight would destroy the rest. That's what they set out to do. They hit a number of these targets in that sequence, and it turned out that it was pretty effective.
Everything we dropped, everything we shot, the jets, everything worked as advertised.
I find it hard to believe that Saddam can last an indefinite amount of time.
According to U.S. officials at the time, the attacks proved effective against the targets they knew about.
Precision-guided missiles and TLAM cruise missiles have struck hard at the nuclear, biological, and chemical facilities. As have the many aircraft we've shown. Over half of them, those facilities have been severely damaged or totally destroyed. We have absolute confirmation that we've destroyed over 11 chemical and biological storage areas, and we've also destroyed or heavily damaged 3 chemical and biological production facilities, and we're going to continue a relentless attack on this very, very, very heinous weapons system.
But in hindsight, the claim turned out to be inaccurate.
It's not clear that we hit any biological weapons facilities in Iraq because we didn't know where the biological weapons actually were during the war. And all the other chemical facilities that we were bombing at airfields and at other places, refrigerated bunkers that we suspected were holding chemicals or biological weapons, post-war, what the UN found out is it didn't appear that chemical or biological weapons were stored at any of them.
When you're trying to destroy a nation-state's ability to manufacture and store weapons of mass destruction, you have to have accurate intelligence on where it's manufactured and where it's located. If you don't have that information, you're bombing in the blind. And although we didn't think so at the time, we did a lot of bombing in the blind.
Part of the problem was Iraq's ability to house chemical and biological production side by side with civilian businesses.
Lots of dual-use facilities where you're producing something for the civilian economy, but by the same token, it has the capability of developing a biological or a chemical weapon. So we were completely caught short on his capability.
Saddam, for example, claimed the U.S. destroyed a milk plant when it bombed a suspected biological weapons facility on January 23rd.
Was there any military things in this plant?
Nothing.
It was all
for producing milk for babies.
It is not an infant formula factory, no more than the Rabta chemical plant in Libya made aspirin.
As the war progressed, several Iraqi scientists defected, revealing previously unknown NBC sites to Allied intelligence. The sites were quickly bombed. But all in all, the NBC campaign was considered a black eye for the American intelligence community.
What we discovered, thanks to inspection at the end of the war, was that there was a robustness, a layering, and a duplication of his weapons capability that was far more profound than anybody thought.
However, the Defense Intelligence Agency did estimate after the war that the American air campaign set back Iraq's nuclear capability 3 to 5 years, and his chemical and biological capability 5 to 8 years. When we come back, the final phase of the air campaign.
We got a whole bunch of guys throwing AK-47s up there and down here. Does that mean anything?
In early February 1991, 3 weeks into the air campaign, U.S. air commanders in Riyadh stepped up attacks on the Iraqi ground forces in both Kuwait and Iraq.
Good shot.
As the ground operation grew closer, we shifted the weight of effort up to those units that are right on the front lines opposing the coalition surface forces.
The Allied objective was to reduce Iraqi ground forces and artillery to 50% of what they were at the beginning of the war. F-15s, British Tornadoes, and F-117 set out to cut the flow of food, weapons, and ammunition going from Iraq to the thousands of troops in Kuwait. Railroads and bridges were the main targets, now easier to hit because of precision-guided bombs.
Yeah, Leon, not much left of the bridge, though. Good takeoff.
The first video is a railroad bridge. And obviously, they have very limited rail lines, and when you take a railroad bridge out, it makes a big difference. We try and hit right near the shore because that's the most difficult to repair. That's one end of the bridge. You'll now see the same bridge again. We're now hitting the other end of that railroad bridge.
By cutting supplies, Allied forces hoped to undermine the resolve of the Iraqi soldiers.
This disruption of the lines of communications is vital for the attrition of the Iraqi military machine.
And it was a formidable military machine. An estimated 700,000 Iraqi troops were stationed in the desert, skilled at camouflaging themselves, their tanks and artillery in the sand. Their ground defenses were heavily fortified with surface-to-air missiles and anti-aircraft artillery. To suppress the artillery sites, air strategists divided Kuwait and Iraq into kill boxes, sectors of desert 30 miles wide and 30 miles long. Above these kill boxes flew bombers like the F-16. Perhaps the most versatile fighter bomber in the Gulf, the F-16 Falcon dropped tons of conventional bombs on Iraqi troops and artillery each day. Night missions fell to the F-111 Aardvark. Designed as a high-speed tactical aircraft in the 1960s, the F-111 used infrared heat sensors and thermal imaging to pick out Iraqi tanks hidden in the sand.
Ooh, hot plasma.
And they were looking in their scopes, and they were seeing that the Iraqi armor that had been dug into the sand was radiating the heat and not dissipating heat as fast as the sand around it. So suddenly, what looked like just a sandy desert had all these little spots of Iraqi tanks that had been dug underneath.
Good shot.
This infrared targeting became known as tank plinking among Allied pilots. Other aircraft using thermal imaging for tank plinking were the F-15 Eagle and the A-6E Intruder, the Navy Marine attack plane with terrain-following radar and a self-contained laser designator. Perhaps the most lethal tank buster was the Army Apache helicopter.
Walked my laser down the tank column and ruined some people's days, I think.
I don't think they ever saw the Apaches, and when the Hellfires were hitting and destroying, they didn't know which way to run.
Total disorder.
Total disorder, chaos.
So feared was the gunship, one group of Iraqi soldiers surrendered to the hovering aircraft rather than face its Hellfire missiles.
We got a whole bunch of guys throwing AK-47s up there and down here. Does that mean anything? We're going to back away from them a little bit
Another successful tank buster was the lowest tech plane in the sky, the A-10 Thunderbolt. With its heavily fortified fuselage, the A-10 could survive heavy ground fire while flying low and slow, looking for tanks.
So they designed the airplane with a very, very tough armored fuselage. The engines are placed in a position that they're in the back and they're not apt to get damage that is flying up from the ground from their hits and so forth.
For weapons, the Thunderbolt was equipped with a 30mm cannon that fired a depleted uranium charge. In spite of its cumbersome design, the A-10 was highly maneuverable at low altitudes and speeds.
She's combat proven, she's combat tested, and she is an absolute warhorse.
The Warthog was not the only unexpected success against Iraqi ground troops. B-52s dropped tons of conventional bombs in randomly timed strikes against Iraqi Republican Guard positions just above Kuwait in eastern Iraq.
The B-52 had a breaching role and hitting some of the frontline targets, sort of setting out open corridors for American armor to roll through, but also in softening up units that were out in the back areas. A Republican Guard unit stationed out in the desert with a number of tanks.
That wasn't the only consequence of the B-52 strikes.
It's harrowing for troops on the ground to suddenly find this 1.5 mile long, 1 mile wide column of bombs erupting among them when they didn't even know there was an airplane overhead.
By February 24th, after 37 days of bombing and 35,000 attack sorties, coalition commanders decided Iraq's troops had been softened up enough to launch the Allied ground offensive.
They'd been demoralized, had been paralyzed, and basically their will had been broken by air power.
Kneel down. Get down.
According to Allied officials, the air campaign had driven Saddam Hussein underground, disrupted his country's infrastructure, and bombed his army into virtual insignificance.
You have to say the Air Force won the war, and air power won the war. It's not to say that ground war wasn't important in terms of finally ejecting the Iraqi army from Kuwait, but air power was the dominant arm, and air power was the dominant military instrument which was used in the Gulf War.
In hindsight, the Gulf War air campaign changed the way America looked at the use of air power.
Air power has become the preeminent military force in the battlefield. And while it may not solve every problem, and it may not even be applicable in some situations, it's going to probably be the first choice of U.S. in terms of fighting wars.
The air campaign and the exponential leap in technology have also altered America's perception of warfare.
The Gulf War air campaign basically has changed the expectations that people have, Americans have, about the conduct of warfare. They want it to be short, they want it to be decisive, and they want it to be with a minimum of casualties on either side. And we demonstrated that capability in the Gulf War.
Air power was the decisive weapon in Operation Desert Storm, but decimating Iraq's defenses was not enough to declare victory. In our next hour, we'll look at how U.S. troops and tanks sealed the decision on the ground. The History Channel will continue with our perspective on current events. I'm Arthur Kent. Stay with us because history matters.
Please get us up. Hello, New York. This is Saudi Arabia. This is not a drill. This is Saudi Arabia. This is not a drill. New York. Okay, let's go. We're firing Patriots. We've got flares and we've got sirens. Let's go. Focus.
Coming up next, the liberation of Kuwait in Operation Desert Storm, the ground war, only on the History Channel.